Good day, everybody. This is Chris back again with the Ancient Scholar, and this particular vignette is going to be talking about bones of the spinal column. So the spinal column is divided into several sections. The first section is the cervical or cervical spine. It contains 7 vertebrae. Underneath that is the thoracic or the T-spine, and that contains 12 vertebrae. And then underneath that is the lumbar spine, which contains 5, and then the sacrum, which is fused, 5 fused vertebrae, and then off of the sacrum is the coccyx, which is 4 little fused vertebrae. So here is the sacrum, and then the coccyx or the tailbone is 4 little fused vertebrae, that kind of little nub that hangs off of that. So 7, 12, 5, 5, 4 is kind of how I remember it. So what we're going to need to be able to do is differentiate between a cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebrae. And you won't have to tell, is this an L4 versus a T6 or anything like that, but just in general, is this a cervical vertebrae? Is this a thoracic or lumbar? So all vertebrae have the same general structure in that you have the body here, okay, the body, and then you have these pads, these cartilage pads that sit on top of the body, and then another vertebrae sit on top of that, so in between the body. Okay, so you have the body, the cell of the body of the vertebrae. Okay, you have an extension that comes out toward the posterior aspect of that. That's called the spinous process. Okay, and that's actually, you can feel those sometimes as you run your finger along the posterior aspect of the spine. Okay, that's the spinous process. And then you have these processes that come off the side here, and these are called transverse processes. So you've got your body, your spinous process, your transverse processes, and then you have a hole here, which is called your vertebral foramen, where the spinal cord itself slides through. Now, to differentiate between a cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebrae, there are several key characteristics you need to be able to identify. So this is an example of a cervical vertebrae. Okay, you can see it has the body, okay, the large foramen there, and then it has the spinous process as well. But you'll also see the interesting thing about the cervical vertebrae is that it has these little holes in it here on the side here, okay? These are called this is called a transverse foramen or transverse forama. Why do we have these in our cervical spine and nowhere else? Because this is specific to the C-spine. That is because you have 2 arteries that run up the posterior part of your C-spine, okay? Or the posterior part, and these are called the vertebral arteries, and they run up and they supply the posterior part of the brain with blood circulation. They go into a structure known as the circle of Willis, and they're the vertebral arteries that come in, and then in the front you have the internal carotid arteries come into the front of the brain, and then the front circulation and the posterior circulation meets in a structure known as the circle of Willis, which is something we'll talk about later. So this is specific to the C-spine. You do not see these particular forama, these transverse forama, in any of the others, so this is really easy to differentiate. Now, when we talk about the thoracic versus the lumbar vertebrae, and let me get this out of the way here, okay, it can be a bit more nuanced, but in general, okay, comparing thoracic to lumbar, in general, your lumbar is going to have a much thicker body because there's more weight bearing that goes on there, okay, and the spinous process and the transverse process of the lumbar vertebrae is going to have a moose-like appearance. It kind of looks like, here you get your moose head, and then you got the horns of the moose, right? When you look at it, it kind of looks like a moose, okay? Now, when we contrast that to, say, a thoracic vertebrae, you're generally going to have a longer spinous process, and it will have kind of like an elephant, or some people say a giraffe-like appearance when you look at it. Okay, so elephant or giraffe-like versus kind of a moose-like appearance. Okay, Now, when we get into the subtleties, there are some subtle structures that exist specifically on the thoracic vertebrae that you don't see on the lumbar vertebrae. And that is that you have additional facets on these. Remember, facets are joints. You have facets where this articulates with other vertebrae here. You've got those. But on here, you have facets here and here, okay? Oh, let's see there. Right there, right there, right there, and right there. And these are known as costal facets, and that is actually where the ribs come in. Cartilage from the ribs attaches. So you have these costal facets, which are specific to the thoracic vertebrae and not necessarily the lumbar vertebrae, because you shouldn't normally have ribs attached by cartilage to your lumbar vertebrae. So hopefully you guys found that helpful. Down and dirty. Okay, look for the foramen on the sides, and that tells you that you're dealing with a cervical vertebrae. Okay, look for an elephant or giraffe-like appearance with a long spinous process, and that tells you that you're likely dealing with thoracic. And then if it has a moose-like appearance and a large body, then you're likely dealing with a lumbar vertebrae. Okay, guys, hopefully you found that helpful, and as always, thanks for hanging in there.